Hello, and welcome to SDG Global Spin. Our guests today are Jon Bonsall, a partner from Keegan Werlin, and Jeffrey Brooks, a partner from Adams and Reese.
So I often tell clients when they come to Washington, D.C. for either a fly-in to visit Congress or go see an administrative agency that days are fluid and flexible and things can get crazy here in Washington, D.C. Little did I know that that would be probably the most understated thing that could happen last Wednesday when there was a riot and an insurrection at the Capitol by American citizens. And that has caused in the last week to have such dramatic effects here in Washington, D.C., some of which are unprecedented, and there are more which are to come. And today we're going to talk a little bit about what is to come and what are the facts, what are the fictions, and what can we look forward to going forward there. I will tell you that, you know, from my perspective as a guy who worked on Capitol Hill as a chief of staff for a member of Congress, that institution, that body, I've been in those halls. I know where those places are. I know a lot of the people, a lot of the staff, and we talk about members affected, but those staff were affected as well as many of the people who work in the offices from either doing food services, mail, and architect of the Capitol. There's a lot of people that I know up there that were personally affected by this. It's hard for me to talk about it because it's about a place that I care about, and that's the institution. And there's a lot of things that went wrong, and many of which we're going to talk about today. And for those who are not here in America, this is something we haven't seen very often, and we're going to have to deal with it. There's some facts and there's some fictions that are out there, and hopefully today we can get through some of those facts and give some ideas of what's going on. John?
Thanks, Jeff. And as Jeff indicated, these are in some respects unprecedented times for us here in the United States. What occurred last Wednesday really struck at the fundamental pillars of our democracy in terms of the electoral process and the smooth transition of power, which our country has as a bedrock of its existence. So what Jeff and I are hoping to accomplish today is to give you a little bit of an overview, perhaps some historical context, and perhaps break down a little bit of some of the terms you've heard, some of the institutions that were attacked, so to speak, some of the fundamental processes that came under attack, and give you a better appreciation of what we in the United States have been living through over the last week, but more critically over the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah, one of the things I think we can start with is what happened after they cleared the Capitol. And I know a lot of folks around the world are asking, well, why would they continue to go on? And I think a hallmark and a bedrock principle, whether you're a Democrat, a Republican, or an independent, is that our republic and our democracy continue. And I think that's what the speaker, the majority leader, minority leaders in both parties, in both houses, wanted to accomplish. And they wanted that certification vote, which was at the center of this, to take place and to be done. And I think that's what transpired. I know there was some questions that came from some member firms across the world that talked about why would they call in Vice President Pence Mr. President while he was presiding in the capacity of the certification vote. And I think the simple answer is as Vice President, he is the President of the Senate. That is what they were referring to as the President of the Senate. Come January the 20th, now Senator Kamala Harris will become the Vice President of the Vice President of the United States and the President of the Senate. So she would be presiding then, and he was presiding at that point in time. That certification vote is baked and based upon our Constitution, and that Constitution declares that the Electoral College is to be certified by the House of Representatives, and that's where the objections by over 100 members of Congress on the Republican side were coming from. That whether it was Arizona, and I guess that's all it went to was Arizona. Pennsylvania was probably going to be the next one that was going to be objected to. And that's what was where we had to settle that in order to get to the final step of Vice President Biden being president-elect of the United States and taking the oath of office next week.
Yeah, and let me, again, for people who are not as familiar with our system of election process here. Let me provide perhaps a little historical context. As Jeff was saying, the Congress met last week to certify the vote of the Electoral College. Well, the first question may come to mind is, what is the Electoral College? What role does it play? Our founding fathers back in the 1700s, these are people like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and many others, who really led the creation and the formation of the country through the establishment of our Constitution, had to come up with a series of compromises to really ensure an equal representation across, at that point, the 13 states or the 13 colonies. One of the unique characteristics of our electoral process in the United States at the presidential level is that it's not decided by plurality. For example, in 2016, Donald Trump did not have the greatest number of votes cast compared to his opponent, former Senator and former First Lady Hillary Clinton. Clinton actually won or received the greater number of total votes. But in framing the Constitution, the framers were very concerned that the large states not dominate the small states. For example, the Congress itself is made up of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate. The House of Representatives is a reflection of population. And by that, I mean that the states with a greater number of people have greater representation in the House of Representatives. Our U.S. Senate, however, irrespective of the size of an individual state, every state has 2 U.S. senators. So a small state with a small population or a largest state with the greatest population in the U.S. Senate each are represented by 2 U.S. senators. The Electoral College somewhat followed the same pattern. Rather than having the large states be able to dominate an election for president by virtue of the fact of having more voters within that particular state, they came up with a process by which Electoral College was established, where the electors are to reflect what occurred at the state level in the election for president. And that is determined based on the number of representatives you have in the U.S. Congress. So a very large state has a greater number of electors. A smaller state would have obviously, correspondingly, a smaller number. So the Electoral College is really intended to provide a uniform representation across the country so that every state, big or small, has a role in electing, or feels that they have a role in electing the next president. And that's been, clearly exhibited in the last couple of elections, where candidates are actually going into districts where only one electoral vote is at stake. But they realize that in a very tight race, every vote counts. So when the Congress was meeting last week, it was, as Jeff indicated, really supposed to be a formality to take what had happened in each individual states with the election of these electors, to count the votes and confirm that Joe Biden had in fact been elected president back in November.
Let's go to a little bit about what's going to happen, what's happening today, a week later. And then we'll maybe take a step back and say some of the other things that have come out regarding the riots that did occur. But today, just this morning, the House of Representatives, the Democrats, who have the majority with Speaker Pelosi, have introduced articles of impeachment. They did that yesterday. Those articles of impeachment will be voted on today. There was a House resolution passed, introduced yesterday as well, that called on Vice President Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment of our Constitution, which would entail a majority of the current cabinet to remove the president and say he was unfit for office. That resolution did pass. Vice President Pence sent a letter to the Speaker saying that he would not call for that 25th Amendment to be executed. When that occurred, that started today's activities, which is going to be the voting on the articles of impeachment. Interesting that I heard this morning that right now, this Donald Trump will be the first president to ever be impeached by the House twice. That's going to happen later today when there is a vote. The House has appointed what are called trial managers, because once the House votes on the articles of impeachment, those are transmitted to the United States Senate, in which the Senate has a trial. And the senators, all 100 of them, sit as the jurors and make a determination after the trial is done as to whether or not the president is guilty or innocent of the charges that are being put forth. And in this instance, the last time it happened, he was not found guilty. Therefore, while he was impeached, he was not convicted of that. As the Senate, as the House managers of the trial, the Democrats have appointed already, I believe, 10 to 11 members of the House, ranging from the House Judiciary Committee Chairman, Mr. Nadler, to Eric Swallow, to several other members who have a legal background as prosecutors, to prosecute the case in the Senate. The president will have his own team that defends him in the Senate. And the last time this happened, it was a combination of outside counsel, as well as members of the House who are lawyers who have a background in this subject. The primary people who did defend him were lawyers who were from his outside legal team. They were given permission by the Senate to do that. It has not been determined yet who will represent the president before the Senate in that instance. And the process for doing that, once there's a vote and the articles of impeachment have been passed, then there will need to be a agreement among Mr. Schumer, who's going to be the new majority leader, and Senator McConnell, who's now the current majority leader. And when they have this, they will have an agreement on timing and how much each side has, and that presentation will occur. It took almost 3 weeks, I believe, last time to have the trial before even a vote was called. When that happens, unfortunately, that's an all-day occurrence, and the work of the Senate is sometimes just stopped. And that is a big consideration that is taking place right now with the new administration and Mr. Biden and Ms. Harris being inaugurated next week. This will be one of the, the vote would take place today. The trial would not take place before the inauguration. It would take place after the inauguration, which could be one of the first times it's ever happened. And in that instance, would that take away from the first 100 days that then President-elect Biden and Ms. Harris would want to have to push forth their agenda, and the Democrats then would have control of all three, the White House, the House, and the Senate, albeit a small margin. John, you want to add anything there?
As Jeff has kind of indicated here, we're in, a very unusual situation. The House will, in fact, most likely before the end of the day, impeach President Trump for a second time. By impeaching, they've leveled an accusation against him that should subject him for removal from office or prohibit him from holding public office again in the future. In this circumstance, I believe it was about 150 years ago, the Secretary of War under President Grant had actually resigned his position. He was impeached, and then he had left office. So one of the questions is, so what effect right now? The impeachment will occur. The trial will clearly not occur until after President Trump has left office. And I believe the Senate has the House has up to roughly 90 days to forward the impeachment papers officially to the Senate, at which point the Senate is in a position to consider and hold the trial itself. So the timing here is that President Trump will be gone, President Biden will be presiding, and there'll be new dynamics at that point as to how quickly a trial is actually held, if a trial is held at all. There's a lot of calls right now for unity, to come together as a nation. What's been interesting is even many members of President Trump's party have criticized his actions last week and do in fact believe it's an impeachable offense. And the way we got there is that Mr. Trump, for months before the elections in November, was casting doubt on the integrity of the process. Some of that was due to initiatives that had been implemented at the state level in the face of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of voters are reluctant to actually go to the polls for fear of being exposed to the virus. So many of the states allowed a greater latitude in terms of mail-in voting, which you can do in advance. And the president tried to stake a claim going back to last spring and summer that type of a process was ripe for corruption, was ripe for dishonesty. And even as the results were coming in that night, he was already claiming that the election was being stolen from him. And that's really what began to create a dynamic that resulted in the insurrection that occurred in the Capitol last Wednesday. Now, this was after probably 3 or 4 dozen courts had heard various appeals filed by the Trump team and rejected each and every one of them, including 2 petitions that went to the U.S. Supreme Court. So we now have a situation we're going to impeach. The papers within some period of time, but clearly well after President Trump has left office, will be sent to the Senate. And then at that juncture, there may or may not be a trial. There's a lot of dynamics here, as Jeff said, that still need to be played out. We're really in uncharted territory, but clearly there is a fair number of members of Congress in both the House and the Senate that feel that the insurrection was directly caused by the president's actions and a counter to the Constitution. And while he would no longer be president at the time of, quote, conviction, he should be barred from the ability in the future to hold office.
Adding to that uniqueness, as John put it, and that was well stated. One of the issues that comes to mind is after Inauguration Day and the time frame before the House has to send the articles of impeachment over to the Senate, is that there's going to be a new Senate. That new Senate's going to entail 2 new Democratic members from Georgia, which makes it a 50-50 tie in the United States Senate. And at that point, as I mentioned earlier, the president of the Senate, then the new vice president, Ms. Harris, would be the deciding vote, 51-50 if it stayed according to party, each according to their party. With that comes some very, very strange and unique things. At 50-50, the minority, at this point, the minority leader, Mr. Schumer, becomes elevated to majority leader, and because his party's in the White House, and he has the vice president in that final 51 vote. That means the Senate is going to have to come up with a power sharing arrangement. The last time something like this happened where it was 50-50 was back in 2001 when President Bush was in place. And at that point, Senator Lott and Senator Daschle had to come together and figure out a power sharing agreement. That power sharing agreement included even number of committee seats for both Democrats and Republicans, even number of staff. But what they did do, which was unique at the time, was if that was a, say, 10-10 split at a committee, it gave the majority leader, in this instance, that would be Mr. Schumer, the ability to pull that piece of legislation or that issue to the floor for a vote. So let's say, for example, 30 days, there is a trial in the Senate. It's a 50-50. We do have a power sharing agreement in place, and that has to be negotiated for regular order and parliamentary procedure to begin in the Senate. That vote, they're going to have, at some point, committee hearings. They're going to have some point regular order. Impeachment's going to be taking place, which is highly volatile and highly charged. And then you're going to have this very unique power sharing arrangement in place. And while there are many Republicans, as John said, who have said that what they believe what the president said in his words did cause this insurrection, they also believe that it's time to move on and put forth the next phase, which would be the Democrats in control and have Mr. Biden have his ability to become president and put forth his agenda to the American people, to the Congress, and move on from there. It's going to be very unique. It's going to be very difficult to see how this all plays out. The one thing that I do think all members, and I say that all 535 members of Congress and the Senate, there will not be any more insurrections from this Congress. They won't call for that. They see how horrible that has made this Congress look. This body that they revere so much has taken such a blow in the eyes of the American people. I think that they're going to try to figure out how to do unity going forward, while still possibly trying to figure out how to make sure that Mr. Trump has some form of punishment going forward. And I say that there's a movement afoot by, at this point, Minority Leader McCarthy in the House to have a bicameral, both the House and Senate, censor the president. There would be no, that it's a punishment in the form of a rebuke. It does not bar him from running for office, as John alluded to, by being impeached and convicted, but it would send an incredible bipartisan signal by all 535 members that this type of action is just unwarranted and will not be ever tolerated again. John, why don't we talk a little bit, if you don't mind, why don't you give your thoughts a little bit on the members of Congress who may have, we're going to object to the certification. Are there repercussions for them internally with the House and Senate, and maybe externally with the voters? Your thoughts on that?
The United States is clearly divided at the moment in terms of what we call, red and blue states. There's a significant number of the country. Obviously, two presidential elections were pretty close to 50-50 in terms of the plurality of the total number of votes. As Jeff was just saying, the U.S. Senate is, quote, 50-50, or about to become 50-50 in terms of Democrats and independents versus Republicans. There's already been a couple of actions taken out there that is kind of interesting in terms of, again, somewhat unprecedented. There are probably 2 or 3 dozen, if not more, because there additional United States corporations are coming out almost hour by hour in indicating that they will not provide political contributions to any member of Congress who did not vote to certify the election results last week. Our political system in this country is heavily dependent on political contributions to fund campaigns for election or re-election. And the fact that some of the biggest corporations in the United States have already written off, for the moment, up to 150 members who did not vote to certify the election last week is a practical impact in terms of what is occurring out there. You also have the fact that a lot of the Democrats would like to have some votes where these members have to once again side either with Trump and therefore be cast as insurrectionists, or side with impeachment, in which case they begin to get closer back to the fold. There are also members who are actually looking to move against some of the individual members that have taken the most extreme positions. But that's a very gray area as to whether or not, as Jeff knows even better than I, the immunity that members of Congress have for what they say on the floor is paramount. So it's going to be very difficult at this point for any formal actions to be taken, but there is significant practical impacts at the moment led by the corporate community in the United States, and that, but not only corporations, but some of the major business associations as well. It's really the business community that stepped up first and is really called foul in terms of what these members did to aid and abet President Trump in bringing down an insurrection in Washington last week.
One of the other things that we probably need to address today is the minute-by-minute changes that are occurring that happened. For example, yesterday afternoon late, the New York Times quoted sources close to now Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader in the Senate, that he was pleased by the idea of impeaching President Trump, which would be a complete 180 from where he was the last time the impeachment came. That signal, though it wasn't through him, but through sources close to him, was eventually walked back a little bit, and the word he wasn't pleased about it was said that's not what he said. But the main point of that was they never walked back the idea that the Senate Majority Leader may, for the Republicans, may be open to impeaching the president. And that is a huge issue as it relates to what could happen. That could signal that Mr. McConnell said, I'm ready to move forth from the president. Everybody else should be too. And that maybe that gives some Republicans some ability to possibly convict and vote that way if there was a trial. Or it could be that he's signaling to Mr. Schumer and others that he's ready to move forward. They're not going to put up a fight. Let's figure out a way to make this a censor or something else. It's really hard to say. Senator McConnell is a very fine politician. He understands the parliamentary procedures of the Senate. And that small tacit comment last night, and again, walk back this morning, could present an opening for a trial in the Senate. But as John alluded to earlier, it's time consuming. It's very difficult. Vice President Biden is going to talk about unity in his inaugural address, I'm sure. He was going to do that before. It's even now more pronounced. So will that divide the country further, or is there a way to move on? And that would give Republicans, as Mr. McConnell said, the ability to move on from Mr. Trump and focus on the future. That's yet to be decided, and it's going to be day by day. What happens right now is the vote is they're debating on the House floor till about 5, 6 o'clock today, and then there will be a vote. Right now, it's 223 to 209. I believe is the official count. 2 House seats have got to be filled, one because of a death and one because of a resignation. And when that happens, later today, there will be 5 or 6, maybe even more Republicans voting with the 223 Democrats to impeach the president again for the second time. I wanted to just mention a little bit on some of the things that go back a little bit to last week and what else we should look for, not necessarily from the political realm, but from the legal realm, from the prosecutorial realm, from the criminal realm that happened. Last night, our Department of Justice had a briefing in which they said there's 170 active cases that they are looking for sedition and insurrection and other felonies and misdemeanors. As everyone knows throughout the world, there were 4 individuals that were killed that night. 2 were by heart attacks, but there was a 14-year Army veteran shot by a Secret Service agent, and a Capitol Hill police officer who was trampled to death by door being pushed by the rioters pushing that door. One of the things that's going to happen is they are going to go and they're identifying, they're using social media, they're using pleas to the public. That's already happened. Many of the individuals who pose for pictures by themselves with selfies or whatever and post it on social media, the American public identified who they were, helped find out who they were. And many of those, for example, the gentleman who was sitting in Miss Pelosi's chair, the individual who took the podium from, I believe, the press office, those individuals have already been identified. They've been arrested, and they are pending in preliminary hearings in the federal court system throughout the country, some in Florida, some in Arkansas. So this investigation is going to continue. It's going to be nationwide. They are going to want to find those individuals, and they're going to want to prosecute them to the fullest extent of the law. And that includes, and one very, very interesting point is about that officer who was tragically trampled to death. is that there is now talk that those individuals, not only the ones who were up front that they can see who were pushing that door, but the ones 5, 6 behind that who were helping push, that there could be felony murder charges placed if they can be identified on all of those individuals, because it's just not one, it could be all of them. So there is going to be dramatic and traumatic and definitive and harsh punishment for all those rioters. And the Department of Justice, whether it be currently under President Trump or soon to be under President Biden, those individuals are going to be found, they're going to be identified, and they are going to be prosecuted under the laws of the United States to the fullest extent possible. So I think that is something that we're going to have to see and watch as this time goes on.
As Jeff just indicated, the behavior that occurred last week was unacceptable. Our country it was founded on any number of principles. Well, one was freedom of speech, and the ability to express your views is sacred in this country. But what occurred last Wednesday crossed a line that went significantly beyond, in my humble opinion, any type of protection of free speech. And I think that the type of criminal activity that occurred, as Jeff just indicated, law enforcement has been very vigorous in the last couple of days in identifying those individuals who are at the front and taking them into custody. They're going to continue that effort in the days ahead. And also very critically, with the inauguration of President-elect Biden next week, you're going to see a significant security presence around the Capitol in Washington. There's no question that there will be people there protesting the Biden presidency. They continue to believe that the election was stolen from President Trump, despite all facts to being the opposite, despite the fact that all courts have rejected each and every such legal action that the Trump people have filed, despite the fact that Trump's own Attorney General, Mr. Barr, concluded that there was no evidence of widespread fraud in any of the elections that occurred around the country. People are going to still show up and protest next week in Washington and also potentially in some of the other state capitals. So it's likely in terms of media that there will be some additional coverage of people exercising, hopefully no more than exercising their right of free speech, to continue to voice concerns. But in terms of the type of resurrection, law enforcement will be there, security will be there to ensure that we have a peaceful transition of power, which again is a bedrock of our country and something that up until the last week or two, we've never seen a president try to undermine our democracy to the extent and to the effect that President Trump has done.
One other thing that I think that we need as this goes forward under the Biden administration and currently under the Trump administration, and I really think I say that because I don't think it would matter the party. One of the bedrock principles of our country have always been fair justice. And for example, those individuals who could potentially be charged under the felony murder rule for that officer, I made mention of that he was trampled to death. While that release has not been made official, that's what press reports have said. It does bring up the point that those individuals are going to be given a fair trial. They are going to be given a trial where evidence will be presented and they will have a right to defend themselves, and they very well could bring up any number of things, but they're going to have a jury of their peers in our system make that decision if that's what they so choose. But unlike in other places here in the United States, while they did something that is unheard of and just unbelievable that most people just still can't fathom what transpired with climbing the walls and breaking windows, they're going to be given a trial by their peers in front of a judge and a jury. So that will be something that each one of those individuals, whomever they are, wherever they are, and wherever they're tried, will be given that opportunity. John and I both have talked a little bit about the 25th Amendment and what the House tried to do by passing the resolution last night. I think it may be good that if John and I talked a little bit about the 25th Amendment. The 25th Amendment to our Constitution is a mechanism that allows a majority of the cabinet officials, and those are individuals who are appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, and those cabinet level officials, for example, would include the Department of Justice, the Department of Interior, the Department of Agriculture, Department of Veteran Affairs, Department of Transportation, Commerce Secretary, Treasury Secretary, and the list can go on. Those individuals, if a majority of them came together along with the vice president, who would have to sign that declaration and say that the president is unfit to serve office, if that was the case and the vice president was to sign that, by our own Constitution, that the president of the United States would be removed from office, and at that moment, Vice President Pence, in this instance, would become president of the United States. That is something that the Democrats have asked for, and obviously Mr. Pence said that is not going to take place. What is interesting is that over the past week, and it started almost immediately last Thursday, is several of Mr. Trump's cabinet secretaries resigned on their own. And in their letters for resignation, they stated very clearly that they just could not be a part of the administration and with the president that did what he did. So in that instance, for example, the education secretary has resigned. Department of Homeland Security, the acting director there, who's a cabinet level official, he has resigned as of yesterday. So that number of people, does raise the question, did they do that so that they would not be able to invoke the 25th Amendment? This is a personal belief. I believe they were so offended by what happened that they resigned because of that and did not want to be a part of the administration any further, including the Transportation Secretary, Elaine Chao, whose husband is Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader. John, thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on. The impact and the effects of what occurred last week. Some people have just believed that President Trump crossed a line that has now put them in a position they can no longer serve in his administration, even if it's only for a week or two. It's really a statement of principle that many of these people made by their resignations. But there's another part of this process, too, which is different than the 25th, that we probably should talk about for a moment as well. Back when President Nixon left the White House, and he, in fact, had been impeached, and Republican members came to him and said, you're going to have to leave. And his situation was a little bit different than the current one. He had taken some actions that, again, undermine the democratic principles that are behind the electoral process in the country. And within a couple of days of him leaving, his vice president at the time, Gerald Ford, became president, and several days later issued a pardon to former President Nixon, which essentially meant that he would not stand liable for any of the actions or activities, criminal or not, that occurred while he was president of the United States. Mr. Ford at the time understood very clearly that by taking that action, politically, it was a death knell for him. He would no longer be viable on the national stage in terms of, for example, running at that point for election as president of the United States. But what he did focus on, and Jeff and I were talking about this earlier, is he felt that in order to unify the country, he needed to pardon Nixon, because we had to put the entire sordid mess that President Nixon had been involved in behind the country and to move forward. Interestingly, we're in sort of a similar situation here, but in a little bit different way. There is some thought that President Trump will try to pardon himself before he leaves office, and he will also likely pardon his sons, former mayor of New York and now his personal secretary, Mr. Giuliani, and others, so that they no longer could face prosecution once they left. President Trump has has classified these impeachment proceedings, both the first one and this one, as essentially witch hunts and attempts by Democrats to undo the election of 2016. And so he has denigrated the entire process and maintains innocence in everything. So as we go forward in the Senate, if President Trump tries to pardon himself beforehand, he will then try to use that as a defense. Now, a lot of legal scholars do not believe that a president can pardon himself. Yes, he can pardon others, and President Trump has been doing that over the last month, people who were close to him and have been convicted of various offenses over the last couple of years. So another nuance here in the coming days will be, will President Trump pardon other people close to him on his team, and will he try to pardon himself? And that's another component of this entire impeachment process that will, again, unknown at the moment, but a possibility, and then how that plays out in the months ahead, again, will be fascinating.
You know, one thing that Jon brought up that talks about the peaceful transfer of power. And I will tell you that, you know, over the years, I've been fortunate to attend several inaugurals. And I've watched, you know, the ones that I enjoy the most were the ones when it went from one party to another, regardless of what party it is. I've been to both. And the reason that was so sacred to me is because when you're sitting on that side of the Capitol, the west side of the Capitol, and you're looking up on the podium as the clock strikes noon and the new president is inaugurated, and you see that it is what, as Jon said, a peaceful transfer of power, where in other places, unfortunately, there are military issues and coups and things of that nature. Here it was a peaceful protest, a peaceful transition of power. And fortunately, this time around, we're all going to sit there, whether it be COVID, because we're not going to be there in person on television, but we're going to see that Capitol, and we're going to see that beautiful picture again of the Capitol behind it with the Statue of Freedom on top. And we're going to realize that just a week or 2 weeks prior to that, there were people who thought so less of our country that they were trying to break the windows to get in and do harm to legislators, to staff, and to the very institution that really defends freedom around the world, and that's the Republic and the country of the United States. I think it's going to have a whole new meeting next week, and it hopefully is a time for everybody, regardless of party. And it's been, Jon said 5 years. I've been up on Capitol Hill one way or another for over 20. It's changed a lot, and I think it's more like 10 years that they've been brewing back and forth, the hostilities between the parties. I hope it gives all of us, regardless of whether you're involved in it, you're not, you're back home, whatever, a time to pause and really realize that while politics may divide us, there's so many things that do bring us together. And hopefully the inauguration will have that opportunity where everybody sits and thinks about what did happen, what can't ever happen again, and move forward. Whether you agree with Mr. Biden or not, move forward, articulate your point, bring it to the American people, and decide the fate of the country by how we've done it all these years. And that's through elections. And you have a winner and you have a loser.
Well said, Jeff. And I think as a practical matter, our democracy remains strong. This has been an incredible challenge. And I think we'll all kind of look at it and say, what needs to be improved? Are there issues that have now come up that show perhaps some areas that need some fundamental change? But at the end of the day, our democracy has survived. We will come back together. We are a divided country right now in many respects, but this has shaken everyone. Some of the polls show that in a matter of about a week and a half, President Trump's favorability rating went from roughly 44% favorable to the low 30s. So the country is really, I think, woken up to the fact that this is just unacceptable behavior, and we cannot countenance it again in the future.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to share our thoughts on this. And for me, I hope everyone has a wonderful day, and make sure that next week goes off and remember the things we talked about, that the democracy is strong The United States is strong, and I think, as always, we will persevere. And thank you very much for the opportunity.
Our founding fathers back in the 1700s did establish an incredible framework, and the fact that it continues to be strong and that it survived last week's events is just further testament to the core fabric of our democracy. Thank you for listening and spending this time with us.
And that concludes our recording. Thank you for joining us today. You can find this and many other episodes at scgglobalspin.com.